All right. Thanks for joining. Welcome, everybody. My name is Matthias Fraas. I'm the curator of DDD Europe. And maybe some of you were in the session or have seen the video of the session from last week about the CFP in general. In this session, we want to talk a bit more about the live coding that we want to do at DDD Foundations. So as you may know, DDD Foundations is a sub-conference of DDD Europe. We're trying to make it a lot more practical and accessible. In general, we always say that it's about the things that are the topics that are generally accepted by the DDD community, whereas the main conference is usually a bit more, looking outwards and, trying to figure out what's happening and new things and where it could go and go into philosophy and all kinds of things. Whereas DDD Foundations aims to be very pragmatic and show people stuff that they can use either for themselves when they're getting into DDD or for teaching others or scaling it within their organization, that sort of thing. And what we want to try is to make it all live coding, because it's well, somebody once said if it's not live code, it's dead code. But more seriously, it's I like it because it sort of forces you to do something real, right? Show DDD in practice in a way. It's sort of in the language of the audience, right? They're used, they're all programmers typically. They know how to think in code, and then seeing that happening, seeing how somebody else reasons about something, or how they would express a modeling code, or what sort of things they would do, what sort of patterns they would use. I think that's all very, very interesting. And we find that, in my experience at least, it's also a lot more engaging to watch live coding, because you see it happening as opposed to just watching slides or reading code on the slide. You see it happening in real time. You're sort of thinking along, trying to think with the speaker, and then even when prompts are given, for example, like think about how you would solve this. People are involved, right? They are already following along. So yeah, that's sort of roughly why I want to do this. It's sort of an enabling constraint for making sure DDD Foundations is very practical, right? We get this often in DDD in general and DDD Europe specifically, people who feel it's not practical. And when programmers say that, they often mean, I don't know how that translates to my code. So here we're trying to do that. So for today, we just want to talk a bit about our own experiences. So Thomas Koopman is here with me as well, my colleague who has also a lot of experience doing live coding, and make sure that maybe any concerns you may have for doing this, we can address. It's not as hard as people think. It's not as scary as people think. So that's the purpose of today. So later on, please ask any questions you can think of. Are there any questions before we move on? Thomas and I made a bit of preparation about what we want to talk about, but maybe there's specific concerns you have right now.
Oh.
All right.
Are there any people in here who are already thinking about doing a live coding maybe? Or are you just interested in general? If you're interested, okay, Charles.
But probably not at DDD Foundation, but I have a talk to do live coding in a few months, and I wanted to know what you had to share.
Okay.
I just have like the Python event sourcing library with this stuff that goes through, but it's pretty much DDD shapes on the tactical patterns. So I was just hoping to get some guidance on whether that would actually be something that would be interesting. But anyway,
Yeah.
thanks.
So we can yeah, maybe discuss that later, and
Yeah.
first focus on maybe the general ideas of live coding. So, but is it clear why we think this, you know, we want to try this? We want it to be, you know, real and practical and engaging for the audience, and we think we can do that. All right, I see some thumbs up.
Wat zeg jij? Wat denk
We also I made it up. So we also, maybe I should mention that where possible, we'd actually prefer 25-minute talks over 50-minute talks, because that would allow the audience to see more different things. It would force you to really focus on the message you're trying to bring. I'm not saying we're going to refuse 50-minute talks. Well, we wouldn't have it as an option if we were planning on doing that, of course. But like, if there's, we want it to be, or I would prefer it to be in general, that there's a lot of things like, you know, maybe you have some very specific thing about, I don't know, modeling something, like maybe in your domain, you have something very specific you can show. Or maybe there's a specific pattern you want to show how it can be used. Maybe you feel some pattern is underused, or people are only using it superficially, and you say, well, there's other things you can do with this that maybe you haven't thought of. That would be a really interesting thing to see, right? One of the motivations for this is that a lot of when people talk about DDD and tactical patterns, they know entities and repositories and aggregates and value objects if you're lucky, and even those are sort of explained superficially. But there's a lot more patterns that you can use to express a domain model, right? And that's the kind of thing we want to see. What you do with business rules, how do you, how do you express processes and behavior and relationships and all these kinds of things in code. Ubiquitous language is more than just nouns, right? We want to see how the language is expressed in full. And we also want this to be, advanced enough, right? Even though it's foundations, these people, we assume that the audience are experienced programmers. We don't need to dumb it down, right? We're not explaining programming, right? We're showing, programming, but here's how you can do it better, or assume they know basic DDD patterns. So we probably shouldn't explain a value object, but we should show maybe advanced usages of it, that kind of thing. Maybe another thing that I think is important is it's still a programming language agnostic conference. So ideally, I would advise to use well-known programming languages, popular languages, and don't overuse very language-specific features, right? Like objects are, of course, very common in many languages, but some languages would have very specific things that are maybe, if you feel like you would need to explain it to somebody who doesn't know that programming language, maybe you can not use it. We want to avoid that it becomes, that half the talk is explaining language features. The exception, of course, would be if your talk specifically is about a specific programming paradigm, so, for example, it shouldn't be an Erlang talk, but if you have an actor model talk and you use Erlang to show that, you would have to explain some Erlang specific things, right? That would make sense. But it's not a programming language conference, right? It shouldn't be about the language in general. It's more about, how do you use, how do you implement DDD in a logic programming language? That would make a lot of sense as a topic, for example. Yeah, maybe Thomas, you want to talk a bit about tips and ideas of how to do it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, both Matthias and me, we've have some experience with live coding, and Matthias already said it, but live coding probably is something often people see as being more scary than an actual talk. I don't think it has to be that way. It's still just a talk. The only thing is you're also doing some coding, but the audience, there are some advantages, like your audience is much more engaged, and they will probably hint to, if you make a mistake, they will help you find out because they are actually engaged. So that's a great thing. So some general tips here, like, yeah, you of course want to do some prep. Like when I did my live coding sessions, I'm not necessarily doing prep to know what I'm going to do, but more that I know that I can do it in the time slot specified. Because if all the good stuff comes at the end and you don't have time anymore, that would be that's not great, of course. So do some prep just so that you know how long things are going to take. One thing you may need to practice is talking and writing code at the same time. You can, well, of course, you not necessarily exactly at the same time, but at least making sure that you say what you're doing in your code so that it's easier for people to follow, and you're also explaining what you do.
Yeah, it helps if you do stuff like doing a copy paste is sort of invisible what you're doing, right? Because suddenly some code disappears, it reappears elsewhere. But if you say what you're doing or why you're putting it there, that helps the audience a lot.
Yeah, indeed. And yeah, trivial stuff is probably not stuff you want to focus on. You want to focus really on the topic. Like Matthias said, we would prefer if we have more short talks that focus on one thing, and then it's really important that in your live coding you only focus on those things. Now, there are some really practical things that can help you go faster, and that is, for example, have different Git branches where you can switch between if you need to. Make sure that you're able to switch, that you know how to switch between branches then, of course. You also have, like, a lot of IDEs have snippets or macros where you basically can say, I type one word, you press tab, and it expands with certain things to fill in. If you have like boilerplate structures that you need to do, or repeating structures. You can also have
something I've done there. Sorry to interrupt. Something I've done there is the first time I write it in full and explain the whole thing, and then the second time I use my macro and I say this is the same structure as the previous bit, so I'm not showing you that again, but in my macro I have my cursor. You can do that, like preset where your cursor moves, so I only fill in the the novel stuff for that bit. So you sort of guide people in understanding when and how you use the macros. But the point being, of course, that not every word you type is, or not every letter of code is typed live, but the process and the thinking and the reasoning behind it is sort of clear and explained.
Yeah, indeed. Another tip is like putting stuff in comments so that you can just uncomment things. The same thing as what Matthias said of copy pasting or just doing something. You still need to explain it the first time, of course. But the comments can be something very useful for tests. If you have tests that you need to work along the way, but they don't work from the beginning, you don't necessarily need to implement all the tests. You could have them commented out and then comment one test at a time. The advantage of having tests running next to your code, of course, is that they help you as well make sure that you stay on track and don't have any issues. But yeah, and in general, yeah, make sure that you're prepared, that you've practiced, that you know your setup well. And for your actual setup, try to make it really focused. Hide everything that people don't need to know about. Only show one actual window. Hide all the rest. If you have both slides and code, make sure that you know how to switch with one keystroke between them, that you are not looking scrolling through windows to find it back. Yeah,
But
you
it's
use
much more fluent if you put your instead of slides, have some text ready in
yeah.
your editor, and then you can just show that, for example.
Yeah.
So you keep it smooth, you keep it in one place. That usually helps.
Yeah, if you only have one, if you're for example, my last live coding in the beginning, I used a couple of slides on Miro actually to just explain the domain briefly, and then it was all code. So if you can do it like that, that's better, because then you don't need to switch around. Simple things like having everything in one file makes it much more easy to navigate. Well, unless you're 1,000 lines, of course, but if you're all the things you're doing in the live coding, if you have it in one file, just explain to the audience, or say to the audience that normally you would organize it differently, but for presentation, it's much more easy to just have all the context right there on the screen. We are going to try to send out some general tips on font size and what kind of themes to use. In my opinion, light themes often have a higher contrast and work better. But those are definitely things, well, we're going to send them out, of course, but those are things you need to watch for. If you have to make sure that you turn on line numbers so that you can reference if you're on line 33, I'm doing this. And that can also help the audience. If you have a mistake, they can say, oh, there you made a mistake. And if it's not immediately clear from context, you can just ask what line. Make sure that the people see what the actual line is that you're working on, that it's visible where you're typing and where you're looking at. Those kinds of things are really making it easier both for you and for the audience to follow along. And the advantage of actually doing the writing the code is that you're going a little bit slower, but that makes sure that the audience follows everything. And when you're just having slides, if you're just having slides, you don't know how fast do I need to go, and then maybe you either go too slow or too fast. When you have the code, people are much more invested, and you have much bigger chance of going at the right pace and that everyone understands it. Yeah.
I want to talk a bit about like, there isn't just one format of doing something like this, right? There are, you can do sort of a traditional live coding would be, you explain a problem and you show how you solve it. But I've done, years ago, I did a talk which was refactoring and sort of writing tests for untested code. And there, because I had 40 minutes with 3 minutes of explanation, so I had to, and when I first tried it, it was 2 hours. So for that one, I spent a lot of time preparing to make it very, focused and minimalist, and making sure that everything I said and did was very well prepared. Almost like a like a kata, trying it over and over and over again until I got it right. But I've also done talks where, for example, it was much more like a few months ago, I was at a conference, a speaker dropped out. I improvised a live coding talk. The reason I could do it is because I knew the problem well, and I had solved it before. So I knew where I was going, but just sort of explaining it along the way. So I could do that with very little preparation, actually, because it's more like, if like I've had this experience where I'm at a conference or wherever, and somebody says, hey, how does that work? Or I ask somebody, how does that work? And you just pair with somebody showing them, what you do. That can work as well as on a stage, but you need to know, of course, the problem very well. But I've also done something entirely different, which was at an unconference, at an open space, where I just did a kata with somebody, and we were basically, the kata was very simple, but we were debating how we would approach it, or why we did something a certain way, and how, why now this way, and how we would maybe do it another way. So it was very meta. The coding was almost, well, we didn't do much coding, but we talked about how we coded it a lot, and that was improvised, but but it was a lot of fun. And I did something similar with Eric Evans online once as well. I think that's somewhere on YouTube, where we're just pairing and sort of debating meta aspects of it. Yeah, and Thomas, you also have some different things you've done.
Yeah. I also did the regular one, but a real fun one as a lightning talk is the Blitz kata. What I do there is I ask 10 people onto the stage from the audience, and you're saying, hey, who does that? But it worked every time that I did it so far. So you just need to have one person going first, and then everything works out. And basically, I'm the driver for 10 minutes. When they're on stage, I say, this is the kata you need to solve. And every person gets exactly 1 minute to tell me what to type. And it's a really fun format. You're not going, well, the chances of finishing the kata are slim, but it's a really fun format to do. And it's super engaging for the audience. It's super engaging for everyone there. So you can think about different kinds of ways of doing it. You're not limited to just you presenting it. Maybe you find a format where you have an interaction with someone, well, maybe prepared or unprepared, and do stuff like that as well.
Yeah, they could be on stage, they could be just the audience and telling them, well, think for a minute about how you would solve this, for example. That also sort of gives them more engagement and interaction. I've done something, I don't know if that would work on but just in a conference setting, but just as an idea for how far you can go with this. At Socrates Germany last summer, we did blind katas. So one person is the driver. They are typing on their laptops, but nobody else sees what they're doing. And so, but it was with a small group, like there was maybe 5 or 10 people, and you're solving a kata, and you don't even know what programming language you're using. So you're just instructing them, okay, write a test, tell me run the test, tell me, write a test that tests for this, and run the tests and tell me what the outcome is. Okay, now implement a function. You don't even know if it's a functional language or object-oriented language or whatever, so you just instruct them. And it worked really great. At some point, somebody asked, are you even actually typing stuff? Because we couldn't see in the audience. But it was fun. It was sort of forcing people to think about code without seeing it, which is sort of a whole different way of doing things. Again, I don't know if that would work on stage, because you have to assume that there's going to be 200, 250 people in the audience. There's things you cannot do with that size of a group, of course, but there's many options. I think there's many unexplored ideas of how to engage an audience in coding that you could come up with.
Yeah, I also we already mentioned it a few times, but if you're thinking about topics, don't pick anything broad. We would prefer a lot if you went into depth than just staying on the surface. Something I've been to some technical conferences where you see the title of the talk and you think, oh, that's really interesting, and then you go to that talk and it stays on the surface all the time. And it would be much more interesting if they dropped like 80% of the content, but went into one thing in detail. Of course, you would not see anything, but you wouldn't see everything, but then you would know a little bit more about that one thing.
It's also an opportunity to think about maybe existing talks you've done, and think about how would I show this same topic if my main medium was code instead of slides, right? How could I express this? And then, at DDD Europe, of course, we've had stuff about ubiquitous language, about expressing a modeling code, about refactoring, stuff like that. Is a given, of course, that you would be able to show it, testing, etc. But, design principles, maybe even architecture, right? There's maybe ways that you can show how this architecture works or is evolved or changes, but show the code aspects of that, because that's sort of ultimately where things are being expressed at the detail level. Maybe it's an architecture talk that uses code to express something. I don't know. I think there's many options there. But yeah, the sort of topics that could be relevant here, obviously anything where you're showing the model or you're evolving the model and refactoring to express it better, when you're making a, making a richer language in the code than what was there. But also, like, how would you do, I don't know, defensive programming with DDD or declarative programming with DDD? Functional core, imperative shell, CQRS, hexagonal architecture, these things all have some aspect that is, that is expressed in the code. How does that work, right? How does DDD work in a logic programming language or an actor model? How do you make the business rules more visible, right? Instead of a bunch of if statements, how does that become a rich model where you can sort of see, okay, different tenants have different rules that can be configured and that have maybe workflows, or, I want to see that instead of just, a bunch of entities and if statements, right? Yeah, that sort of topics, I guess. I hope you all have a lot more ideas than I have. Yeah, I think this is pretty much what we had going into this. Let's maybe start with, are there any like questions you have or concerns where you feel like, I'm not sure if live coding, if I can do that or how I would do that, or bottlenecks for doing it? We want to make sure that that is easy.
I have a question. What about doing the, let's say, live coding into where we have like driver navigator, where we have one person actually coding and the one it's like explaining what the other is doing, pointing out things and working to the audience in a way that we say we decouple the two responsibility and we don't bother too much as a person. Does it make sense? Is it something that is acceptable?
I've seen talks like that. I think that makes sense. Maybe be aware that you're creating a bit of a disconnect between the typing and the explaining, right? So I wouldn't necessarily try to do everything that way, but it's worth considering. But it can be like, if you do something like that, you can also think about, okay, now I have a different medium, right? I have two people doing things. What can I do using this different medium? For example, I've seen a talk once at Joy of Coding, and it was about pair programming, but it was almost like a little play, like a theater play, where they were showing all the anti-patterns of pair programming. So, and they would enact that, right? And so one person would, for example, physically steal the keyboards while the other one was typing, which was, of course, very annoying. Or they would delete all the code from the previous person and replace it. Or they would spend a lot of time doing formatting and not focusing on the actual problem and the code. So they were showing all these anti-patterns as sort of a mirror to the audience, which was very funny and very like interesting, right? You were sort of seeing some of your own anti-patterns. So that was a great way to, take this and go a bit further. Of course, in that session, the code wasn't very relevant. They could have picked any problem. They never even finished it. So, but yeah, pairing or even ensemble programming with volunteers or with maybe a group of people that maybe it's just your team from your work, and you show how you mock program or ensemble program with them on a problem. I don't know. These could all be interesting things.
Thank you.
If you're here and you're wondering still, like, would I do this? Or I'm not sure I can do this. What's holding you back? That's sort of the problem we hope to solve today. But any questions are fine. Or maybe you've done it and you have experience to share. That would also be
yeah, I can talk a little bit about that if you want. I think the most useful thing I did, but I think it's in the link Matthias posted. which is to have a list of things to. So usually you have to set up some things, and so when you rehearse, you do the setup at the end, and so you don't have to remember what to do before you begin. You do just the setup at the end each time you rehearse, and so when the day starts, you already have the setup done. Not sure if I'm clear. But basically, you write down everything you need to set up, and you rehearse it at the end. No, not clear. So, for instance, yeah.
What kind of setup are you talking about?
Yeah. So, for instance, let's say you are live coding something that needs to create data in the database, and so obviously you need an empty database at the start. And so I would write down empty the database in a text file, and when I rehearse the talk, I'll do the emptying of the database at the end. And so every time I rehearse, I know the database is empty because I always end with the database cleaning.
It's basically a way to make your whole setup is repeatable, right? That every time you have the exact same like sandbox.
Yeah.
Or you could have I don't know, a Docker or something that you can reset. Or
yeah, and if you do it this way, if you do the clean of the database at the end, you can never forget it. And the worst thing is to arrive at the D-Day and the H hour and see, oh no, I forgot to clean the database, and then everything derails because we have some data and then nothing works. So just remember to write down the setup you need to do and do it at the end. Just a little tip like that.
And in general, think through everything that could go wrong.
Yeah, and
like think about how you're like one problem I've had is you arrive at the stage and the keyboard is on a surface that is sloped, so your hands are like this and it's very uncomfortable and you have to bend over. Of course, we're going to try to offer some options like table, etc. But think about, you know, if you're used to using a mouse and you end up at the conference with just a trackpad, you'll be sort of at a disadvantage, right? So think about things like that up front, and we can, you know, work with you to give you the physical setup that you need. But I interrupted. You were saying something else.
Yeah, sorry. No, it was interesting. And the other thing is to try to not depend on the internet too much. Because when you rehearse the day before, everything works fine, and then on D-Days there are hundreds of people with hundreds of phones, and nothing works. So yeah, just try to make it. So for instance, if you, I don't know, if you interact with a server of database, have it on localhost and not far away.
Yeah, one thing that I got there, and I was lucky to. I was using a different laptop on my thing, and my editor decided to auto update and not let me do anything. I was just lucky that it happened in the prep phase and not right on stage, because it took like 5 minutes. So if you have auto updates, maybe disable them. Yeah.
Yeah, I had twice Windows updates happening in the middle of the talk. So for some period of time, I was bringing 2 laptops with me, but I'm the bad lucky guy. So I don't think that happens too often, but it might.
Sacrifice a goat to the god of demos, and
exactly.
Yeah, stuff will go wrong, but well, big things where it prevents you from doing stuff is of course a big problem, but small things like, you know, people want you to succeed, right? They want to be entertained and learn something and see you like that's what makes it so engaging, right? They want to see you get to the end because there's, you know, interesting stuff happening, and how will this ever work out? Like, how can they, well, like with refactoring talk, how will this mess ever get clean? And then in the end, if it all works out, it's very fascinating for people to root for you, right? Oh, I see that somebody has posted a GitHub with was that a tool for the speaker buddy? Can you talk about that? Whoever posted that?
It's not really a tool, but it's like an agreement that you are willing to be a buddy for somebody. You know, you were just talking about when you are doing a live coding session, your system crashes or something. It's very nice to have that, to know that somebody has a laptop available for you if you need it.
Yeah, I'll post
so if your system crashes.
the general chat. Yeah, that makes sense. What we do anyway with the conference, or try to do more of that we've done in the past, is if people want that, we can pair you up with another speaker to, you know, try some things or get some feedback or have a soundboard, and vice versa, of course, if you want to take that role for somebody else. So it's like a supporting each other. And then the minimal commitment is just 1 hour, right? You just say I'm going to meet with that person for 1 hour on Zoom or whatever, and you know, give them some feedback maybe, and if you want, you can spend more time together to improve the material. But it can be helpful to not just, you know, be on your own and get stuck in your head like, is this interesting, is this good, this so yeah.
I can share also a few things
Please.
that working for me. So I'm not so jazzman as Matthias. I'm always over prepared. As I mentioned, I'm a bad lucky guy. May I try to share the screen?
Sure.
Yeah, this one. So let me find it. Yeah. So for example, I did a talk that is extremely funny, even for me, or maybe especially for me, to build even story in 1 hour. So I'm usually, when I'm having this live coding session, then I'm having such script. And this is more or less, those are snippets. So I can, for example, if I have the IDE, then I can just copy and paste it somewhere, or I can change those into the snippets, because
Oscar, we're not seeing your IDE. I think you're sharing
not
Yeah.
this,
you're sharing
not
the
this
GitHub
one.
screen.
21st century issues. Let's try again. At least there was nothing bad here. So yeah, so I'm having such script. Now you see
Yeah,
the
yeah,
motion.
we see it.
Yeah. So it's like a partial, it's more like a slides in a way that I can do like copy, and let me go to the screen, and I can even do like add new file and paste it. So it's just reduce the amount of time, because in my opinion, no one likes to see people just typing on the keyboard. That's just boring and killing the vibe. But if you have something prepared and you don't need to copy and paste, but as Matthias said, have the snippets, then you can paste it and then explain it, walk through that, and then use another part. And if you provide such script, I mean, it works for me, you don't have to, but it's quite a long one. I'm usually doing it, I'm firstly preparing the final solution, then I'm trying to find out how this could work to make it more interesting and storytelling. And I think that this can help you to maybe not forget of what you would like to do. So try to create those live coding to help you to provide the narration. So for me, when I'm doing even presentation without live coding, then I'm trying to make slides mostly for me, to help me to go with the narrative. So do the storytelling. And in that same sense, I'm trying to do live coding, because if it's helping me to provide the storytelling or narrative, then it would be also easier for the audience. And yeah, as Dimitri said, I would suggest to avoid everything that can break, like trying to do something on cloud or on internet or any fancy stuff usually ends up badly. And one more trick is most of the IDEs have the presentation modes. If you are using some JetBrains stuff, then this is quite cool. It gets the proper, you know, all those lines that guys mentioned before, and it's usually also the font size is pretty good. But of course, again, on the on the live coding in the internet, then dark mode works well, but usually light mode works better. So yeah, and I think that you really need to prepare that and try it a few times. So see, my script is quite long, but I'm kind of psychopathic in that preparation. But yeah, you don't need to be like that. I'm the bad lucky guy. But yeah, I agree. It's really cool, especially for the presenter. If you're showing something that is interesting for you, then people will notice that you like it, and share your
your passion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And maybe a remark here is that like you were showing a bunch of I don't know what they were, records or data structures, but code is well, we say live coding, but there's many things that you may or may not consider code, but that you can still employ to do something that is live creation, right? So you could use UML, for example, and then generate the code from that, or draw it in UML, and then say, okay, now I'm not going to show you how to type all of these fields and whatever, you just copy paste that in, but they've seen you live build the data structure, for example, or build the UML structure or something like that. That could be interesting. There's languages like well, Scratch comes to mind, which is a very visual programming language for children. But the nice thing is that you can really see sort of blocks moving and see the structure of an if statement much better than in textual code. There are things that might be interesting here, like Smalltalk, or the what's it called, the Glorious, you remember, Thomas, Glorious Toolkit, I think the name is, which is a sort of very visual Smalltalk based programming environment as well.
I don't know it, no.
Or APL.
APL, yeah, that might be tricky. But so there are ways that you can show live creation of something where maybe not everything is textual code, but it ties into it, right? It's still like a heuristic could be, if in the end it's executable and it works, then you've shown something real, right? As opposed to slides where you can write whatever and say, well, this compiles, but you're not proving it.
Yeah, and one more thing is important to have some fallback, like even Git branch that you can switch, because if you have such a psychopathic narrative as I have, then stuff can go wrong. And if you accidentally found out that you're in the middle, and as Matthias said, getting some help from audience, it's nice, but if it's a small help, but not if it's totally not working and you are scared. So having some checkpoints that if something goes wrong, then you can just switch to the proper branch and continue the what you were building. So just in case.
My ultimate fallback is that even if I don't have slides or electricity, I talk about topics that I care about and I'm passionate about, that I know very well, that maybe I've explained to people already in other situations. And so even without electricity, I would be able to talk about it. It wouldn't be maybe the full experience, but I can, if you're talking about patterns, and people understand the pattern, then you can discuss at a higher level. So know your material. That's basically my message, right? Know what you're trying to explain. How would you explain it in a bar? How would you explain it if you have somebody with you for a few hours and you can code it together? What if they type it and you explain it? How would you do it? Then that can give you ideas of how to think about this. And narrative, right? A good story often has, it starts with somebody in a comfortable position, some problem emerges, they try things, maybe it doesn't work, and then eventually they find the change or the insight or the thing that makes it work. That could make a compelling story. Even in a 25-minute talk, you can have some narrative structure there that makes it very engaging again for the audience, which is what Oscar, you should check out his talk. Maybe you can post the link here, Oscar, because it was very funny indeed. But yeah, that helps, of course, if it's engaging or funny or exciting or but focus on interesting first, right? It's something useful, interesting, valuable. That should be the start of it. It's not the, you know, it's not just entertainment. It should be useful. Any other experiences or questions or concerns? If you have very specific ideas of and you don't know if that would work, we can talk about it now, or you can just submit a rough proposal, describe what you have in mind, even if it's not finished yet. And what we often do is then contact the speaker and have a short call and discuss it and see, you know, if it could work. And I should say we usually we have about 350, 400 submissions, so not everything gets accepted, unfortunately, but we do look at everything, and the more you help us in your submission to, even if it's not finished, right? But if you can explain what it is, don't try to like just make an abstract that is a teaser for something. Like, here, I'm going to show the 3 secrets to do, I don't know, event sourcing, but tell us in the abstract what they are, because we cannot evaluate it if you just say, you know, the 3 secrets. How, you know, maybe that's things that everybody knows, maybe that's completely novel things. We can't evaluate that. There's also a private comment field that you can use where you can, you know, put anything that might help us evaluate this. So all the work we don't have to do, like Googling you and finding your talks and that sort of stuff, the more you can provide stuff, the better, the easier for us, of course, to evaluate a lot of stuff.
Could I
John?
I just ask if it's possible in the last few minutes to just recap what the scope of this foundations part of the conference is? I know you've explained it a couple of times, but
Sure, but
not quite sure. When I think about it, I'm just not quite sure. It must be something other than basic training in DDD.
Yeah, it's not DDD training. It's so this goes back to actually some discussions I had with Eric Evans back in 2014-15 when we were planning the very first DDD Europe, and we were trying to figure out, should this be a conference for newcomers, or should this be a conference for sort of the existing community and the people who are already into DDD? And we decided then that, you know, there is a community, it just has no good place to meet. Let's make this about the community and about you know, advanced topics. How far, you know, where can DDD go? How big can, you know, what other areas should we look into? And we did stuff like, you know, inviting people from, well, one example that comes to mind is somebody who was an aviation safety consultant and he basically helped airlines make sure their planes didn't crash. That wasn't a very DDD specific talk, but I thought it was very interesting to see this from an entirely different world and domain, how they thought about this stuff. I felt that was relevant to us. But the downside of that, of course, is that people who are fairly new to DDD, who have maybe just started reading the book or read half of it, as one does, were sort of lost at this conference. And then we started DDD Foundations as a sub-conference. And one of the things Eric had said originally is even if you explain DDD for beginners, it should be experts explaining it, because DDD is hard enough that if beginners explain it to beginners, you get sort of, you know, some of the misunderstandings that we've seen in this community. So it is not a training for people who have never heard of it, right? If they want that, they can get a training or they can read something. It is still a conference, right? It's still sort of, the goal is to get people to think and to talk and to meet and to sort of see things. But it's DDD Foundations is roughly, you know, ideas that most DDD practitioners with experience would generally agree with and say, okay, like take event storming, right? Maybe there's at the main conference, there could be a talk that explores the intricate different styles in doing event sourcing. At DDD Foundations, it would be much more like, showing basic event storming in practice. But again, without dumbing it down, right? We are a conference for people who care a lot about software design, who are, professionals who want to get better at it. We're not a conference for students who or people who just, came from school and have their first job in programming. That's not really what we're trying to do. And then for this edition specifically with the live coding, assume it's people who have been trying this stuff, right? And who know, they have worked maybe in the DDD environment, but they never maybe got really deep into it, or maybe they joined the DDD project in the middle, right? And they are intrigued by it. Typically somebody wouldn't buy a ticket for a DDD conference if they really had no exposure to it at all, right? So they know what a value object is, but they probably don't know necessarily that you can use value objects to express business rules and make polymorphic business rules that, that sort of stuff that would maybe not be obvious to them, but they can understand that if you show it to them, right? So we want the audience to feel like maybe there's some stuff that's going to be over their heads, like a little bit, but they can get like, okay, this is a bit over. This is how I prefer to go to conferences, right? Where stuff is sort of between here and here, and I know, okay, there's stuff that I can understand by next time, so I know where to start looking next. Okay, I've never heard of this thing, but I can see sort of how this would be relevant. Maybe by the next year I go to the conference, I understand this now. And maybe the second year or the third year, I can even have conversations about it, or maybe I'm even now well versed enough in it to talk about it. So I don't mind that, right? It should be, advanced and sort of deep stuff and show very specific things, but under the assumption that it's stuff that they can imagine themselves using maybe within the next 6 months. That could be or some way that they haven't thought about it, or it's not people who have never seen a unit test, right? But it's maybe people who aren't doing it all the time or who haven't explored that. So maybe you can show some different way of doing unit tests, or some advanced idea, or some way of moving that in a different direction. I don't know, I'm just suggesting things, right? Refactoring, they've probably refactored, but maybe there's advanced ways of detecting how to do an interesting refactor or something, or a different way of doing it. I don't know, that stuff could be relevant. Or of course, how do you maybe they know how to refactor, but they don't really know where to go with that. But if you can show this is how you can figure out the hidden model in this, or the missing model in this code, and through refactoring I can bring that forward, and by writing a test I improve my ubiquitous language, and now you see how this whole code is suddenly expressing the problem much better. That sort of thing would be really valuable for DDD Foundations.
And how long
does that make sense? Or
yeah, I mean, I just had a few thoughts, but so how long are these sessions?
Either 25 or 50 minutes.
Okay, so you want to start basically pegging it onto some basic, very familiar concept that everybody would agree is part of DDD, and then
That could work, yeah.
That's into something which is a little bit of a twist, or something that's not quite.
Yeah, maybe there's I know you're into event sourcing, maybe there's a different way from what most people do, right? Or maybe something that sort of is like event sourcing but different. That could be an interesting topic as well. So it's sort of,
I mean, I've worked across so many different domains over the last 20 years of doing domain-driven design. Event sourcing libraries excreted a piece of open source code, something I was doing over and over again over the last 6 or 7 years. But like I've touched on like event sourcing and factory automation in Audi, finance stuff in New York, you know, medical stuff in different places, like, you know, French
that sort of thing would be
industry,
really interesting
vending
as well.
machines
Seeing
in Italy.
sorry.
And there's all sorts of like things that you need to add to a basic aggregate model to make these things work. And the library is a sort of subset. I mean, the kind of union of all of those, the intersection of all those different things that would generally appear in projects I can imagine doing. And people have found it very useful. So there's like all of those things that I've done, but there's also all the questions which people have asked. There's some recurring themes. So I'm just not quite sure. I'd love to do something, but I'm not quite sure if I'm a notable expert or considered to be one. I'm not sure.
Well, you don't have to be the inventor of the thing, right? For this conference, if you can explain it, if you can show a way to do it, if you can make it compelling, that's sort of what we care about most. And then stuff like, you know, domain specific things, right? You mentioned medical and finance, and maybe you can show, okay, this is a problem I had in this domain, and now I'll show that in code. That would work as well. But when in doubt, right, submit it, describe sort of what you have in mind. We can look at it, we can have a conversation about it. The reason I'm doing these sessions here like this and last week and next week is because for the last conference I had about between 75 and 100 meetings with speakers to understand what they do, and sometimes, you know, sometimes it's just, okay, this sounds great, let's do it, or this is not for us, or how about if you could take it in that or that direction. But I felt I was re-explaining a lot of things over and over, so this is what I'm trying to do here. But still, I intend to keep doing that, right? If you submit something, I want to understand it. I might talk to you. That, you know, that might give me a better view on, you know, is this for us or not, or could this work? So when in doubt, just submit it.
So I know it's 4:30, but unless somebody else is waiting, I just have one more question.
I think a lot of people have left already.
I felt between two stools a little bit with the event sourcing conference and the DDD thing. My proposal for the DDD was kind of extending the philosophy talk I did before, which might not really have fitted with that. The event sourcing conference then didn't happen. I'm still not quite sure whether any of the things I submitted were really genuinely a good fit with what you were looking for. I've got,
as I said, we have like 350 or more submissions, so we cannot give individual feedback on everything either. Sometimes it's just like, you know, we've already done this, or this has been at a lot of other conferences anyway, or, you know, maybe we have 3 submissions for a talk on data mesh, and one of them is by the creator of data mesh. We're more likely to pick her. There are many reasons why something is not picked, and it's not necessarily because of the topic itself, but just we don't have space for most things, right? We had in total, I think, 70 speakers out of 350 submissions. That's 1 in 5, so it might just be, you know, maybe it's a great idea, but it didn't come across in the abstract. That's also possible. Yeah, it's just really hard making this conference.
So how do I know whether to put like a Python event sourcing thing to put it into Foundation's DDD event sourcing live, if it's potentially like intersecting with all of those things?
Yeah, if we look at, right, if you submit it and we think, oh, this is actually more of a topic for one of the other events, for main conference, for event sourcing for the foundations, you know, we could ask to move it. So don't stress that too much. But yeah, it's a puzzle every year, basically. So.
Yeah, for sure. Around event sourcing live, I mean, there will be a dedicated session, but what we would like to show this year is to show that event sourcing is practical and that it's solving some exact practical cases. so it doesn't have to be tied to any specific technology by making it practical or showing some nitty-gritty details. But the message that we would like to send is that, see, this is the pattern that people are using and they are getting benefits and real benefits. So it's not an academical pattern. So I think that if it's about Python and if it could show why Python especially could bring this something else additional to the event sourcing puzzle, then I think that this is also interesting, because of course event sourcing live is more technical than the regular conference in a similar way as DDD Foundation. But I think that DDD Foundation is more into the code, and event sourcing live would be more into the architecture patterns and how to apply them, right?
But we have another session on event sourcing live next week, which is also on the CFP page, which I'll post here again for people who missed that. But if you're here, you probably have seen that page anyway. But so next week, there's a Zoom session like this, specifically about event sourcing live. Yeah, we should probably end here because we're over time. But yeah, if you have more questions, our single source of truth is the CFP tool, Sessionize. So if you submit it, then we can start having a conversation about it. That's the best way to do it. All right. So thank you very much, and I hope to see a lot of submissions and see you at the conference and make a great. It's a bit of an experiment this year's DDD Foundation, but I hope it will work out great.
Thank you.
So thanks everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.